Yeah, I watched something yesterday by someone called M. Burkholtz or something, with all kinds of like misinformation about sex, basically, as in like human sex, male and female, that kind of thing. And they mentioned this video by someone called Forrest Balkai, which apparently explains even more stuff, and that's what they based their video on. So I want to see if any of this is true, because the video that was based on this apparently was complete bullshit. So I don't know, let's have a look.
Oh, hi there. I wasn't actually reading this. My name's Forrest. I'm a biologist and I make educational science videos on the internet. Not too long ago, I made a TikTok video about what it
Yeah, to be fair, Atheist Tranny Channel doesn't narrow it down a huge amount, but I think you know who I mean.
means to be trans or intersex. And ever since that day, I've been tagged in about 1,000 different videos of people making the same stupid arguments that we've all heard a million times. Things like, oh, you're either XX or XY, or boys act like this and girls look like that, or you can't change your gender any more than you can change your age or your species. And I figured that I could make a bunch.
I mean, you probably, I don't know, I'm still working out how I'm supposed to like use gender and stuff. Like, it varies so much between people as to what it even means, so I don't know. How am I supposed to say whether you can change gender when I don't really know what someone's talking about when they say gender?
Bunch of different TikTok videos, each one trying
It feels like he carefully worded that intro. Why is the intro fucking 8 minutes? Oh, never mind.
Cram into 60 seconds just how asinine these arguments actually are. Or I could just make one.
Like straight away when someone's saying like these how asinine these arguments are, like this doesn't fill me with confidence, because usually someone who's just kind of telling you the truth doesn't have to sit there constantly. All these arguments I'm hearing, they're so terrible. Oh my God, you know, all that kind of thing. Gender was a linguistic thing up until 10 minutes ago. Yeah, exactly. See, I always thought it was like your kind of outward expression of like your sex, even if that's kind of in a negative way, like not a negative way, but the way like a butch lesbian would, for example.
Solid YouTube video that explains in layman's terms how this whole two-gender system works, or doesn't work from a biological perspective.
Ooh, doesn't work. So, gender bimodal, I'm guessing we're gonna get. Sex bimodal, fuck it, whatever.
Before we begin, however, we're gonna need to get a few things straight. First of all, humans are animals. We are living things, and we are not plants, and we are not fungi, and we are not bacteria. We are animals, and we obey the same laws of nature as every other animal. I'm throwing this in here right at the outset because
did you know some breeds of dogs actually have gender identities?
I want to try to avoid the insane argument that we are somehow special or have some privileged place in this world. We're not, and we don't. Second of all, throughout the course of this video, I'm going to be arguing against the binary model of things like sex and
You do kind of give off like plant vibes, so yeah, I believe you on that one.
Gender, but I'm still going to use terms like male and female and girl and boy. This is just for the sake of convenience. If I were to make a long form argument like this and have special language for the whole thing, this video would be unwatchable. So I'm counting on you to be able to follow.
Why would you need special language for males and females? Like, that's a pretty objectively existing category, and like people know what you mean by it. They don't tell you how to think, they tell you what to think. Yeah, fair enough. I think some of these kinds of people do tell people how to think, but it depends on the topic.
You're also going to need to understand some pretty basic biological terminology, so I'm going to run through a very quick vocab list for you. If you don't want to sit through that, just jump to this part of the video. But I strongly encourage that everybody stick around because this might help avoid some confusion later on. Cells are the most fundamental unit of life. In fact, they're the smallest things that we can call alive. Your body is made of lots and lots of cells of all sorts of different shapes and sizes that all do different things.
Yeah, they give you the stuff they want you to think, and you're not supposed to think further.
DNA is the instruction manual that your body uses to do most things, mainly just making proteins. You have DNA in almost every single cell in your body. A long stretch of DNA that codes for one particular thing is called a gene, and a bunch of DNA, a bunch of genes, all squished together and coiled up into a little wad is called a chromosome. Humans have 46 chromosomes that are broken up into 23 pairs. You get 23 from your dad and 23 from your mom. Each pair does pretty much the same thing. By the way, fun fact, if you were to take all of the DNA out of just one of your cells, all 46 chromosomes, unwind them all and stretch them out end to end, it would be about as long as me, a little over 6 feet long. And that's just in one cell! Another term that you're going to want to know is the term dimorphic. Di means two, morph means shape.
Thankfully, this is only 30 minutes long. That's kind of what I'm expecting as well, though. If it was 90 minutes, I wouldn't be fucking watching this, trust me.
So dimorphism is the state of having two different shapes. This is what we call it whenever a species has differently shaped males and females. And in case you want to know, the term for having males and females in the first place is called being dioecious. A monoecious species only has one sex. A dioecious species has two. I'm probably going to use...
Which I presume every mammal is dioecious then.
Quite a few more terms throughout the video, but I'll try to explain those as I go along. I don't want to give you like a whole word bank here, so let's get started with the concept of what sex actually is. In biology, sex is not just the term for the act of reproduction through gene blending. It's also the term for how we characterize and categorize male.
Does anyone else remember that era of YouTube when everyone had like fucking classical music in their videos because of ContraPoints?
Males versus females. And in the world of biology, your sex is determined by the size of your reproductive cells, which we call your gametes. If you have lots and lots of very small little gametes, we call those sperm and you're a boy. If you have relatively few very large gametes, we call those eggs and you're a girl. Now right away, you can notice that there's a pretty big problem here. What if you don't have any gametes? What if you're infertile? Does that mean that you're neither male nor female? The thing that you have to understand about biology is that all we're trying to do is define and calculate what nature is already doing all on its own. Life makes all the rules and breaks all the rules all the time. So as biologists, our job is to try to just carve out a hole for the peg that nature has already given us. And not everybody's going to fit into that slot. The point is the definition of...
I'm going to be honest, I really don't understand like atheist content. Maybe it's just because I know it was like a big thing like so many years ago. Like, I just don't see the point. It's like, I don't know. I just think there's more interesting things to talk about.
Sex is not unique here. There is almost always some wiggle room, some gray area in almost every single biological definition of anything. It's one of the reasons I became a biologist, because life is weird as shit. So yeah, the fact that I just gave you an actual textbook definition and then immediately blew a big hole in it should give you a pretty good idea of how the rest of this video is going to...
Did he blow a hole in it? Let me hear that again.
Ignoring the fact that an individual of a dioecious species might not have any gametes at all, the fact that we base...
Yeah, because like someone without gametes, it's like, well, what are they set up to produce, you know, that's not working? Like, it's a fairly easy example.
Sex on gamete size in the first place raises a lot of serious concerns. There are several species that are dioecious. They have males and females, but their gametes are all the same size. They differentiate into what we call mating types, which you could call like male and female.
Well, the kind of audience he's going for have ADHD even worse than me, so I think he needs to constantly remind them, otherwise they'll start thinking maybe he doesn't know what he's talking about. I find the kind of people that watch this kind of thing really, really love, like, appeal to authority, and they'll tell me, like, fucking Jammy Dodger has a PhD, even though he's still a moron despite that.
But the only...
Also, why are we talking about other species being dioecious and having same-sized fucking gametes?
Gametes are all the same size. They differentiate into what we call mating types, which you could call like male and female, but the only thing you'd be going off of there is who's giving and who's receiving the gametes. And if we tried to define everybody that way, then things like seahorses would have their sexes swapped because the females deposit the eggs.
Are seahorses mammals? I'm going to assume they're not. Do I really want to Google fucking are seahorses mammals? Because, I don't know, it matters far more talking about mammals. I don't think they are. I don't... Like, apart from whales, are there many, like, sea-born fucking... Seahorses are fish. Okay, great. Glad I looked that up.
Into the males, and then the males fertilize them and give birth to live young. Also, there are a few species that have more than just two gamete sizes. For example, there's one species of fruit fly that has one size of
fruit flies also aren't mammals.
Egg and then 3 different sizes of sperm, each produced by a different...
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like, aren't they like they're put in the same category as like cloven hoof like things? I don't know. I looked something up and some of the stuff they're categorized into, like, it's quite interesting. I don't know. That was a terrible sentence, but let's just keep going.
Type of male. So we should really be saying that there are 4 different sexes here, or at the very least we could say that there's 2 sexes, but one of them is broken down into 3 subclasses of male, one of which violates the whole definition of sex anyway because their sperm is actually bigger than the female's egg. By the way, in case you were curious,
Yeah, you get like limbless like reptiles as well. I find them quite funny.
Here's some bonus vocab words for you. The term for when a species has more than one size of gamete is anisogamy. The term for having just one size of gamete is isogamy. So if you wanted to sound all smart and important, you could say that humans are a dioecious, anisogamitic, and moderately sexually dimorphic species of primates. Also, the whole idea that
Sharks. Yeah, aren't sharks mostly made of cartilage? I find that really strange.
you're just born male or female and that we should just go with what's on your birth certificate is deeply flawed, to say the least. There are several species that are completely hermaphroditic, making both sperm and eggs. There are several species that are sequentially hermaphroditic. They start out as either male or female, and then later on in life they switch.
How long is he going to go on telling us that sex is different in different animals? I could have figured that out myself, if I'm honest.
There are plenty of species that can be one sex their entire lives, and then when it comes time to breed, if they can't find the opposite sex around, they just switch to the opposite sex to help everybody else out. There are even some animals that we call bilateral gonadromorphs that are literally male on one half of their body and female on the other half. You can even have that whole setup just
Yeah, because this is like, I mean, it's interesting enough, I guess, but like, what's it got to do with people when we're talking about like fruit flies?
in your gonads. Ovotestes are when you have ovarian tissue on one side and testicular tissue on the other side of the same organ. That happens sometimes in humans and other animals, and there are even some species where that
would be a DSD though.
It's the normal ground state of all females. So gonadal differences aren't enough to actually differentiate between the two sexes. But I know what you're thinking, right? You're thinking, hey.
Well, if we're talking about a sex term that covers sex for every single species, then yeah, I get what he's saying, but like, if we're talking about people, even if we're talking about fucking mammals, it kind of seems like this is a bit of a tangent. And we're almost 7 minutes in. We need to get to the meat of this, you know?
Just look at the chromosomes. After all, you're either XX or XY, right?
Yeah, I mean, the video that claimed to be pretty much based on this was a lot of sex isn't binary, things that are sex that change when you take HRT are things like nose size and shit. Ultimate Nooblord, hi. What he's trying to say is that biology is really, really complicated, and so there's more than two sexes.
Not exactly. The concept of how sex is determined in an organism is usually broken down like this. You have your chromosomes, those code for what kind of gonads you get, either ovaries or testes, and then those produce germ cells and hormones, and that's how we tell whether you're...
A lot of the atheist community that follow balkai tend not to agree with him on this. That's probably good, I mean...
boy or a girl. And if you go to any high school level biology class, that's probably the explanation that you're going to get. Problem is, that's wildly inaccurate, and it leaves a lot of stuff out. First of all, the sex of an embryo is evident well before gonads ever develop. In fact, there are plenty of species where external genitalia develop before gonads ever do. There are also plenty of chromosomal sex differences.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, if you're trying to make a sex category that works for every single thing in the world, then fair enough, but this is meant to be more specific to, like, people, you know? Because the whole thing is, like, trying to get rid of the sex binary, which they haven't managed to thus far. I mean, this came out 3 years ago, so...
that have nothing to do with genitalia or gonads or any of that, and therefore don't fall into that whole biological gamete size sex determining model, but are still very important. For example, the human Y chromosome.
It is extremely possible that he is just talking complete bollocks.
Contains instructions for a special kind of ribosome, which is the part of the cell that builds proteins. So protein synthesis is just very slightly different in me than it is for any female, and it has been since well before I had any hint of a gender. Perhaps you have heard that we are all females by default, and then it's the Y chromosome.
Okay, Forrest Balkai does sound like a trans man name. I still don't think he's a trans man, but listen, I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm seeing a pretty male, and you've got an Adam's apple right there. I'd be surprised if that was a trans man.
Chromosome that makes me into a boy. That ain't true either. It is true to say that one particular gene on the Y chromosome, what we call SRY, plays a pretty important role in the development of testes and therefore by extension male behavior. So for example, when the SRY gene was spliced into XX female mice, about 30% of them developed male testes, male genitalia, and even male behaviors. Similarly, when the SRY gene was cut out of XY male mice, many of them went on to develop ovaries, to develop feminine behaviors, and even to be able to get pregnant and have litters. Again, those are XY male mice getting pregnant and giving birth. But don't let any of this fool you into thinking that
But that's like some weird experiment, right? I don't know.
Like the SRY gene is some magical on-off switch masculinity. The truth is way weirder and way cooler than that. For example, there was one cool study done back in the 1980s that showed that like female wallabies with XX chromosomes that didn't have any egg cells at birth actually developed testes and went on to be more or less males even without the SRY gene. And you know why? It's because everyone has the genes for both testes and ovaries. What kind of gonads you get, whether it's one or the other or neither or both, comes down to an incredibly complex set of genetic interactions on several different chromosomes, a few of which...
Yeah, true. It just sounds like a weird experiment as opposed to something that has any bearing on us.
Aren't even your sex chromosomes. For example, the gene that builds testes is called SOX9, and it's on chromosome number 17, which everyone watching this has. If you have ovaries right now, that's because on your X chromosome you have another gene called NR0B1, which makes a protein called DAX1 that stops SOX9 from giving you testes. But I have an X chromosome too, right? So like, what's going on there?
There's a gene called Tesco. That's kind of amazing.
SRY gene that we've been talking about works by producing a protein that binds to NR0B1 and stops it from making DAX1 so that SOX9 can give me testes.
I really wish he would stop doing this shit. That's like driving me crazy.
That's why I have testicles. It's because a gene made a protein that stopped another gene from making a different protein that would have otherwise stopped a different gene from giving me the testicles that I have. If you're paying attention, you might be starting to notice a few things here. This means that you could have a totally perfectly functional Y chromosome, but you have a problem with your SOX9 gene, and so you still end up with ovaries. Or this could mean that you have no Y chromosome at all, but you have a faulty NR0B1 gene, and so you still end up with testicles. And yes, there are other animals, even other mammals.
Ever heard of the Sonic Hedgehog gene?
That don't have an SRY gene.
Is that what Usain Bolt has?
That don't have an NR0B1 gene, that are still dioecious and still have sex differentiation. And there are even other animals that have all the same chromosomes and all the same genes that we have, but then they have other genes on top of that, so the whole switch from male to male back to female again is even more complicated. Well, let's ignore all that. Let's say that you have all the right chromosomes and you have all the right genes in all the right places. None of that really matters, because it's the hormones that your gonads produce that actually make your body look and act male or female. All the way back in like the early 1930s, scientists were noticing that female hormones introduced into male rats were producing some decidedly male behaviors, and that similarly, male hormones introduced into female rats were making them like weirdly more female. Even though we've been studying this stuff for like 100 years now, a lot of people are still very surprised to find that we all have testosterone and estrogen and all the other sex hormones in our body at all times, and they don't usually do what a lot of people think they do. Let me give you just a grossly oversimplified explanation of how this works. You see, the cholesterol in your body is converted into progesterone, and then that is what becomes testosterone, and that is what gives you what my anatomy professors would call male internal plumbing. Some testosterone is converted into dihydrous testosterone, and that's what gives you male external genitalia. Some other testosterone is then converted into estrogen and estradiol, and that's where you get female secondary sex characteristics and, get this, male brain anatomy. That's right, female embryos have to produce special proteins to bind estrogen to stop it from getting to their brains, otherwise they would develop mentally like a boy. We'll talk more about that stuff later. So every person has all of these hormones at different levels in their body all the time. Your exact hormone levels are as unique as your fingerprint. It's also important to note that hormones don't actually do anything. All they're able to do is bind to receptors on your cells, and then that makes the cells do the things that make you into a male or a female. And guess what? The production of those cell receptors is controlled by a totally different gene pathway. So for example, you could have a daughter who still hasn't had her period by like 16.
This is like watching Philosophy Tube. He has the point he's getting to, right? It's not that I don't appreciate the science lesson, but I don't know. I don't have a biology background.
Take her to the doctor to figure out what's going on, and you find out that your daughter is actually your son who has androgen and
Yeah, male brain anatomy. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I'm pretty sure the sex brain thing, like, there's like, it's dimorphic to an extent, but for the most part, people's brains are just so different anyway that there's really not much to it. And then trans people use the brain like stuff to try and assert things when their brain just probably changed over the years on HRT, and that's just like a side effect. I'm not sure, but the point is, like, there's almost no evidence for that kind of thing, and sometimes you get trans people trying to use it for something, and it doesn't really hold water as far as I know.
Sensitivity syndrome. So their cells aren't producing the receptors to bind testosterone. So even though they've got enough testosterone in their body to give them freaking antlers and a mane, they still look and feel like a girl. A couple of other important notes about sex chromosomes. Females tend to have XX chromosomes, but that second X doesn't really do much. It tends to just shrivel up, and only about 15% of it is actually expressed at any given time. And whether it's the first or the second X totally varies from cell to cell. You could literally have two cells right next to each other, one of them expressing the first X chromosome, the other one expressing the second X chromosome. Conversely, the Y chromosome mainly codes for male-specific biochemistry and functionality, things like the special ribosomes that I talked about earlier, as well as things like sperm production. But remember, these genes can only be expressed under certain conditions and in certain parts of the body. So, like, for example, that sperm production gene is only ever going to be expressed in the testes. If I don't have testes because of one of the other genetic variations that we talked about a minute ago, this gene does nothing. Even
trans theory, some people have opposite sex brains in a way that makes them feel like they ought to be a woman, equals bollocks. Yeah, I agree with you.
If you have the gene, even if you have the whole chromosome, you could still be missing any one of 5 different pieces of the puzzle of what sex determination actually is. Oh, and by the by, literally everything that I just said is completely reversed in birds. Birds don't have XY, they have ZW, and it's the boys that are homogenous in their chromosomes. So they have ZZ, and the girls have ZW, and they have to go through the complicated back and forth gene pathway just to stay girls. And don't even get me started on dioecious versus monoecious plants, man, because they're even weirder. There are lots of different species that don't have any differences in their sex chromosomes at all. They have totally different ways of establishing and differentiating their sexes. Like, for example, there are lots of species of turtles and lizards and fish where sex is determined not by chromosomes, but by the temperature of their eggs. So you have a female leopard gecko. She lays her eggs in a cool, shady spot. All of the babies are going to be female. But if she lays them in a warm, sunny spot, all of the babies will be male, unless it gets too warm and then they switch back over to female, but they're incredibly aggressive, and we call those hot females because herpetologists are not very imaginative. And it's really, really important to point out that when we're talking about these long genetic pathways, where any one step along the way could take us way off track, what we're talking about are variations. Not anomalies, not deformities, not defects, variations. And there's a huge difference. Over the years, I've studied in a lot of anatomy labs, and I've dissected a lot of human cadavers, as well as other animals, and we see variations all the time. Just differences from the textbook. Little changes in how an artery branches.
I'm not sure. He's been saying a lot of sex is weird if you kind of boil it down.
Or how a nerve passes through a muscle, or even big things like the shape or position of a whole organ. These are classified as variations and not deformities or anomalies because they happen a lot more often than you might think, and they don't really cause any harm. They're just relatively inconsequential differences between one person and another. So my question is it really so hard to accept that things like sex or gender could be subject to the same kinds of variations, and that those variations would be, at most, equally inconsequential?
I mean, first off, I still see gender, as kind of an expression of sex, even if it's an expression of not liking your sex very much. So I don't know how sex and gender can be whatever you just said.
Subject to the same kinds of variations, and that those variations would be, at most, equally inconsequential. This may shatter someone's whole worldview, but it needs to be said. In fact, if you take nothing else away from this video, I hope you understand this one point. An X or a Y chromosome is neither necessary nor is it sufficient for determining your sexual identity. There is no
sexual identity. Hold up, I need more of that sentence because it got weird like quick. Like, your sexual identity, isn't that just like whatever you think of yourself? I don't know.
Take nothing else away from this video, I hope you understand this one point. An X or a Y chromosome is neither necessary nor is it sufficient for determining your sexual identity.
Yeah, so this is where we start, I think, getting into the weird trans shit. I don't quite know what that means. Logical consequence of this. Most women naturally and biologically like pink biros and mini sparkly dresses, yeah.
There is no standard template for male versus female development in biology. And unless you have had your DNA sequenced and analyzed by a developmental biologist, you have no idea what's going on with you in this respect. As it stands, there are more than enough variations on the sex chromosomes alone to make a male that is feminine enough or a female that is masculine enough to pass as the opposite gender in both social.
Well, yeah, passing isn't the same as being, though. None of this is saying that there isn't a binary.
Circles and even to themselves. The language of genetics is in no way laconic or easy. In both social circles and even to themselves.
Pass to themselves. What, so someone becomes deluded into thinking that they're the other sex? I mean, there's one way of putting it. I'm surprised that there's so many trans people in the comments being like, oh my god, yeah.
The language of genetics is in...
Sorry, is this torturing you a bit? It's... Well, we've just passed the halfway line, so...
no way laconic or easy to decipher, and that makes it completely impossible to reduce things like sex and gender down to a binary.
Wait, everything is like...
decipher, and that makes it completely impossible. The language of genetics is in no way laconic or easy to decipher, and that makes it completely impossible to reduce things like sex and gender down to a binary.
Why is it that, like, sex has two extremely, like, binary states then? Why is it that if everyone's sexual development is so different, we still end up with two basic main categories, that being male and female?
Gametes can be gendered in this way. Brains and bodies cannot. The point that I'm trying to make here is that even what you might call normal is a massively diverse group of people. We all live on a spectrum, and people are under no obligation to make sense to you. The other point that I'm trying to make...
What does that even mean? People are under no obligation to make sense to you. Sure, I guess.
Is that we really need to stop saying things like XX equals girl. At most, we need to be saying things like people with XX are typically girls. We need to do away with...
Almost always, I think, is better. Like, I get the DSDs, there is variations, but like, the vast majority of people with XX chromosomes are female. The vast majority of people with XY chromosomes are male. Like, you know.
All of this unnecessarily heteronormative language, if we're going to ameliorate the way that our society perceives and treats gender.
Every time I fucking play again, he says something fucking heteronormative.
X equals girl. At most, we need to be saying things like, people with XX are typically girls. We need to do away with all of this unnecessarily heteronormative language if we're going to ameliorate the way that our society perceives and treats gender as a whole. But to
There's a legit question about how to classify intersex people or kids or old people or people with serious deformities, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, I mean, my current understanding of like intersex conditions is that some of them affect males and some of them affect females. And it's really nothing to do with like identity or like anything like that.
really understand what I mean by that, let's try to define gender. Gender is a fluid term and a social construct. And if you don't believe me on that, just think about this.
Yeah, I'd have thought cisnormative is a better word. I don't know. I wouldn't generally use either if I was talking about something, but...
With me for a second. Can a real man wear a dress? Can a real woman fix a car? What about ordering a fruity cocktail? Who gets to do that?
Oh, this is going to be like worse than Philosophy Tube. Like, obviously they can, yes. Anyone can wear anything. Like, I don't know.
What about being the primary bread earner of the house? Whose job is that? When you think about it for more than 2 seconds, you start to realize that the way that we define gender is completely arbitrary, and it varies from generation to generation, if not from person.
Is that true? God, I can't be bothered to keep going back and listen to the rest of the shit that you said before that.
To person. I mean, consider the fact that our traditional nursery colors of blue for boys and pink for girls was only really established in the 1940s. Before that, dressing a boy in pink would have been all the rage, but now if you ask most people, they'd say that dressing a boy in pink is like somehow obscene. The truth is that masculine and feminine really don't mean anything in concrete terms, certainly not in biological terms. Gender is just a term that we use for how an individual organism expresses their sexual identity in a...
Sexual identity? I'm not familiar with that term. Maybe whenever the word identity comes in, because I'm so used to it being like used as if someone's gender identity is this extremely elaborate thing that they've come up with in their head. Maybe that word is throwing me off.
Cultural context. It is a reflection of that individual's...
Because to me, like gender, like if you're expressing your sex in like a negative kind of way, as in like, or a subversive kind of way, as in like a butch lesbian or something, like that's just still you expressing your sex. Like that's, I guess, your gender or whatever. I don't know. We had to complicate things so much.
Expectations and the society's expectations of their behavior. And just to really drive that point home, let's take a look at a few examples to show just how fuzzy gender really is. We talked a little bit about sexual dimorphism. There are some species where the males are bigger and stronger than the females. There are also some species where the females are bigger and stronger than the males. And then there are a lot more species that are not dimorphic at all, and so the males and females are completely indistinguishable from one another. There are also plenty of species that have 3 or more genders or no genders at all. There are even some species where the males take multiple forms. Some of those forms resemble females. There are other species like hyenas where the females are so indistinguishable from the males that it's really hard to tell the difference without like dissecting them because the females have a fully erectile pseudopenis. There are fruit bats in Borneo and Malaysia where the males lactate to feed.
Yeah, hyenas have pseudo penises, so therefore I guess you can be hyena gender and stick a bottle between your legs and whatever.
The babies. And even human males have mammary glands that can be triggered to develop and even produce milk given the right circumstances, no matter
Hell yeah.
what your chromosomes look like. There are lots of species where the males impregnate
Love me some Trelk.
the females and the females give birth. There are other species where the females deposit eggs inside the male and then the male gives birth. There are some species where the males, not the females, tend to the nest and watch over the
Some species that have 7 butts and that's my
eggs. There are other species where they take turns. There are lots and lots.
hyena gender. Hyenas are assholes, by the way. They're like wild dogs. They just like swarm everything. I don't like hyenas. To be fair, I like gazelles and stuff, and I feel bad for them because they basically live in fucking hell. So
Lots of species that are patriarchal and the males control the group. There are lots and lots of other species that are matriarchal and the females control the group. A lot of primate species, even some of our closest relatives, are matriarchal, not patriarchal. In fact, there are several species where being a big, strong, dominant alpha male would mean no female ever mates with you. And as I said in the beginning of this video, humans are not special in any of this. We are just...
Okay, I draw the line at that person's milk. But that's more about the person than whatever it is they're producing. As far as I know, listen, as far as I know, the Trilk thing, like it's the same stuff, basically. It comes from like the pituitary gland, if that's what it's called. It's more the concept and like how much we really need to be like replacing women, I guess, but I don't know.
animals. The one cool thing that we've got going on for us is that we are the only animals that can communicate in great detail how it feels to have a gender. We should not be afraid.
Well, we can communicate it, but like, do we know what it actually is, or is it bullshit? I don't know. I think humans kind of both got way too smart for our own good, as well as not quite smart enough for our own good. But I don't know, that's a kind of a vague one.
Of these differences between cis and trans and gay and straight or whatever, we should be excited for an opportunity to learn how life.
Oh, he did a fuck, what am I saying? He did a react to Matt Walsh. Oh, we've got the fucking appeal to authority here. Like, oh, look at all this shit I've done. There's some dude with a podcast.
Really works, rather than just trying to cram everything down into boxes all the time. If we want to understand what it means to be anything, we need to focus on.
The point of a word that means nothing is if it's a description word for a person, then people can just take it on erroneously and it won't matter because it never meant anything to start with. See trans, for example.
On science and be listening to the people who are living the lives that we want to understand. And speaking of understanding, let's take
Matt Walsh. I don't have much respect for Matt Walsh. I think what broke me more than anything was when he went on Joe Rogan and was asked like how many like minors he thinks are on like puberty blockers right now. And he immediately was like, well, millions. The true answer is like a few thousand. Even Joe Rogan like corrected him on that. And like he made the whole documentary. It's like you'd think he'd know shit like that because it seems to be a big deal to him. So I don't know. I don't really respect Matt Walsh very much.
Take a minute to talk about brains. Now, I don't have time in this video to get into like the whole anatomy and physiology of how brains work, so I'm gonna skip all that, and I'm just gonna say that there are, in fact, small structural differences.
Yeah, it was like worldwide. He thinks there was millions. It's like a few thousand, like 4,000-ish or something. Like that's quite a discrepancy, you know what I mean? Like it's not like he got it slightly wrong, he got it fucking wrong. And even Joe fucking Rogan was standing up for the trans on that one. I don't think I got changed, did I? Ah, fuck, who cares?
Between the brains of male and female humans. In other animals, these differences are big enough to be seen with the naked eye, but in humans, they're quite subtle. We're talking about clusters of neurons that are like the size of a grain of rice. These are differences that develop within a few weeks before birth to maybe a couple of years after birth. The major notable...
There's going to be a heck of a lot left. There's going to be a heck of a lot less in the UK, I guess, so... I don't know. Well, the UK, Sweden, places like that.
Brain regions that are usually talked about in research papers on this type of thing are the sexually dimorphic nucleus of the preoptic area, the central subdivision of the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, and the vasoactive intestinal polypeptide-containing subnucleus.
God, what is annoying about this is I don't quite have the knowledge to properly, like, debunk it or whatever. I know what he's trying to do, and I definitely have issues with it. But it's like a lot of it I can't really, like, I'm guessing quite a lot of it is probably true. It's a bit like an Essence of Thought video or something. There'll be stuff in there that's true, and then it drives you off a fucking drives you off a cliff when you least expect it. Watch is cringe, but I appreciate his effort. Yeah, I don't know. Like, he's not done a great job of seeming like someone who isn't politically motivated, I guess. I haven't really watched much Matt Walsh, because you know what? Like, there's about 1 million fucking trans people that have gone on fucking video and shat on Matt Walsh, you know. There's people that cover him like fucking every few weeks, like clockwork. So I don't know. There's enough fucking leftists shitting on Matt Walsh.
Of the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Yeah, try saying that 3 times fast. And fact for you, trans people have been consistently shown to have neural architecture in these areas that matches their gender identity.
They haven't been shown this, it's been like suggested. And the two problems with that are, firstly, part of it's probably to do with HRT. The second problem is that human brains are very variable anyway, which is usually like a progressive trans point against like trans meds. Like, I don't know.
Not their genitalia. So for example, the BSTC is about 50% larger in men than it is in women. A trans man, so someone transitioning from female to male, has a BSTC that is the size of a cis man's. And similarly, a trans woman has a BSTC that is the size of a cis woman's. These are structural differences that cannot be accounted for with any amount of sexual reassignment surgery or any amount of hormone therapy. This is literally having a...
Why can't it be... Wait, was he like measuring pre-trans? Not him, the study. Wasn't it measuring like pre-trans then? Why does HRT not matter? The only reason it might not matter is if none of them are on HRT. But like, how the fuck are you gonna like determine that this person who has gender dysphoria then has a different brain? Like, I'm not sure about this at all. But like I said, I don't know. I've never like jumped with both feet into the brains thing.
Female brain trapped inside a male body or vice versa from birth. Incidentally, in homosexuals, that same region.
I think gender identity in a scientific conclusion is like a math equation with random unicorn stickers in it. Yeah, basically.
The BSDC is the perfect size for their gender, because sexual orientation and gender are two entirely different things.
Wait, perfect size for their gender? But when brains are so variable, is there a perfect size for stuff? I'm not sure. Maybe there's like a target ideal goal or something.
However, interestingly enough,
surely what's the perfect size for your brain is what fits in your skull, I would have thought.
The VIP-SCN is actually more dimorphic. So it's smaller in females and larger in males, but in gay males, it's even larger. So it's...
Of course they're brain worries. Of course their belief that they are the other sex is ultimately reducible to atoms and shit in their brain, but we're nowhere near capable of analyzing that. Yeah.
It's like they're more masculine in this way, so that's kind of cool. And speaking of homosexuality, there's clear evidence that there's a big genetic component to that as well. Back in the 1990s, there were several studies that were done that showed that if one identical twin was gay, there was...
What's the perfect size for a non-binary person? I don't think the perfect size for a non-binary person can be expressed using numbers. He's jumping to many conclusions based on a study with like 17 people. Yeah, a lot of these studies are like that. I'd have to look at the study to be sure of that, but yeah. I don't know. I've seen a few of these studies. There's some interesting suggestions in there, because I don't look at them and be like, oh, that confirms this, you know? Because that's not how you look at studies. But it's not very compelling, like in terms of meaning anything for humanity, you know? It's not telling us a huge amount.
Up to a 65% chance that the other identical twin would be gay. But that only works in identical twins because they share the same DNA. In fraternal twins with different DNA, the chance of the other one being gay went down to around like 29% max. And in non-twin siblings, the chances went down to just the normal average for any average American.
Gay people, I'm not like disputing that gay people, you know, whatever.
Which is about 4%. All of this pretty much categorically rules out the idea that somebody can be turned gay or worse, straightened out. But it does not rule out the idea that they're...
Well, it doesn't really rule out the idea. You could manipulate someone into thinking they're gay because they're straight, but you fancy them and you're a gay guy.
Could be environmental factors that cause epigenetic changes that allow those...
Okay, maybe that's what he was talking about. I don't know. Turtles will fuck a shoe. I mean, like dogs and stuff will fuck anything.
Genes to be expressed. These studies are super important, but they lack a lot of...
Gay turtles. Was he talking about turtles? I'm switching off a lot at this point, like fuck.
Context, and that context can only come from people being incredibly gay. But that only works in identical twins because they share... And speaking of homosexuality, there's clear evidence that there's a big genetic component to that as well. Back in the 1990s, there were several studies that were done that showed that if one identical twin was gay, there was up to a 65% chance that the other identical twin would be gay. But that only works in identical twins because they share the same DNA. In fraternal twins with different DNA, the chance of...
Turtle... Did he say turtle twins? I'm sure he means like actual twins, as in like identical, non-identical. Right?
The other one being gay went down to a...
So like one egg that splits into two versus 2 eggs and 2 sperm. I don't know. I'm going back to like GCSE biology here. Like I haven't been 16 in a long time.
Around like 29% max. And in non-twins...
This is like more than half my life ago. I'm trying to remember from here.
Siblings, the chances went down to just the normal average for any average American, which is about 4%. All of this...
Yeah, he definitely didn't mean turtles. I misheard as well. I don't know. I missed that one word and got massively confused by everyone.
Pretty much categorically rules out the idea that somebody can be... A lot of context, and that context can only come from people being incredibly honest with total strangers.
That's the thing. He has made a heck of a lot of like mentions to butterflies and lizards and fruit flies and shit. Like, I don't know.
About very intimate sexual details that at the time these studies were done were very taboo. Personally, I think that if we were to run those same studies again today with our society that's a lot more open and accepting of homosexuality, and we were to factor in things like the religiosity of the person's upbringing and how accepting their family is, we would find that things like homosexuality, or at least
the word is fraternal. We don't use that. We don't use that word in England, I don't think. What's fraternal twins? Let me see if I can find any dizygotic twins. I don't know. I can't remember. I think I just use non-identical. Yeah, I don't know. It's just not a word I've heard before.
sexuality are a lot more common than you might
Not
think.
fraternal,
But that's
like
just a
fraternal
supposition. So
twins.
let's get back to science and wrap things up. So if you've been following along and how accepting their family is, we would find that things like homosexuality or at least bisexuality are a lot more common than you might think. But that's just a supposition. So let's get back to science and wrap things up. So if you've been following along, we've covered that there are at least 3 different areas of the brain.
So we've done most of the rambling. Now we're going to suggest some stuff, but never really expand on it. And when I think it might finally get interesting, it's just going to stop, much like a philosophy tube video.
That are dimorphic between the sexes, and they each vary independently of one another. So that means you have 2 different possibilities in 3 different regions, so 2 times 2 times 2 is 8 different ways that your brain could be structured between what you might call just male.
Oh yeah, I know the word fraternal. I didn't know that fraternal twins was a term, because, again, like I said, I know about like twin studies and stuff, but we're talking about like school days here.
Male or just female. If you factor in what kind of gonads you have, either testes or ovaries, that's another times 2. But you could also have neither and you could also have both. So
that makes sense.
we really should be saying times 4, but just for convenience sake, we'll say another times 2. So that means that you have at least 16 different configurations of what you could presumably call someone's gender. And we haven't even factored in sexual orientation. You would have to make
Wait, that's these wild things, and I wasn't listening for half of it.
in what kind of gonads you have, either testes or ovaries, that's another times 2. But you could also have neither and you could also have both. So we really should be saying times 4, but just for convenience sake, we'll say another times 2. So that means that you have at least 16 different configurations of what you could presumably call someone's gender. And we haven't even factored in sexual orientation. You would have
But I
to
thought gender was socially construct. Fucking, I don't know. These fucking people, they want to make things as confusing as possible. It's insane.
make different permutations for gay, for straight, for bisexual, for pansexual, for asexual. We haven't factored in intersex people. We haven't factored in Klinefelter syndrome, where you have XXY, that's 3 sex chromosomes. We haven't factored in
Klinefelter is something that affects males.
Turner syndrome, where you have X and then nothing else. We haven't factored in whether you
Also, Klinefelter and Turner, I think, are the ones that not everyone even agrees are like DSDs or intersex conditions or whatever.
have a penis or a vagina, or both, or neither, or more.
The left used to be against this kind of biological essentialism. Yeah, I felt like that. Like, we're definitely not the pro-science side anymore, and neither is the right, so who fucking knows who is? I guess the people in the middle.
Or than one of one or the other, which happens from time to time. If you really, really want to push the idea
Like, it was all trust the science during COVID, but nowadays it's not so much anymore.
that everybody fits into just one out of however many boxes, you are very quickly going to have to come up with dozens, if not hundreds of different categories just to fit this insanely parochial worldview you're keeping. It is
I just don't understand how males and females almost always come out either one or the other, you know what I mean? Like, if there's all these different things that can happen and things that can change and stuff, so that we have hundreds of genders, how come the vast majority of people are like born fully functionally like one or the other? Does it mean that there's loads of potential for like mistakes, but they don't happen very often? Like, I don't understand.
so much easier just to say that things like sex and gender and sexual orientation exist on a spectrum. And while it is entirely
But sex doesn't exist on a spectrum. That's the problem. If it did, like, I don't know. My school would have been very different because it wouldn't have just been boys and girls. There'd have been about 7 different things, but there wasn't. The same for the rest of my life. I don't know. What am I supposed to make of this? I don't know. And, you know, leaving out the fact that we're mammals. How many mammals did he mention in this? Hyenas? Like, just because their clits are shaped a certain way? Because some of them evolve unique, like, breeding things, you know? True hermaphroditism is vastly, vastly rare. I don't think true hermaphrodites exist in humans. I think, like, snails and stuff are. I don't know, I could be wrong. I read that there really hasn't been any true hermaphrodite humans.
possible that you're like 100% straight or 100% female. It's also at least equally possible that you land somewhere along this fuzzy gradient. And again,
Yeah, but we're talking about fucking sexuality. Like, finding people attractive is based on so many different things other than just sex that, like, it's not really surprising that some people will find some men attractive as well as women, you know, for example.
unless you have had your brain scanned and your genome sequenced, you have no idea where you land on this.
Oh, I hate this argument. That fucking person I watched did the same thing. Like, oh, I'm trans and you don't know what my cells are. Like, I don't know for a fact that I have XY fucking cells. What I do know is that very most likely, because I was born male, I am male and will die male, that I probably have XY cells. I've never been told by any doctor, nothing's ever been picked up that I have any kind of DSD. So as far as I know, I have XY chromosomes. Like, that's something you can in fact intuit, and something that you'd only really use as a way to obfuscate people and be like, well, I'm not telling you my gender. It's like, okay, sure, we can make a guess for you, but you might not like the guess that we'll make for you, seeing as you're not answering.
Deeply ramified line at this.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. It's like, there's so many different, like, variations on sex, apparently, but we always come out, not always, but the vast majority of people come out one or the other. It kind of seems like the outcome needs to be checked as well, and I don't know if he's really thinking about that much or really bringing it in much. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can intuit that I have XY cells, you know? There's a very small chance that I have some kind of DSD that somehow no one has noticed, if that's even possible, and that I might have different ones, but most likely I don't. So as far as I know, I am XY, and anyone who's being coy about it, you can probably just intuit anyway, because they'd know if they had like an actual DSD. And like a trans person, you'd think that they would like know about that and like talk about it constantly, because they're like, their cells are literally different. If I had a DSD, I don't know that I'd go on about it, but if I did, you know, arguably you could use that to make your transition seem more valid because you don't have XY chromosomes like a man does. I don't know. I've had people just suggesting we don't think of people as male or female. Yeah, I don't see the point in that. I mean, when sex is like the thing that creates all of us, and without it would be nothing, you know, I think it's a perfectly fine like categorization to make. And if people want to like step away from that, they can. It's just that not everyone sees the world the same way they do. So they probably will come across people that will call them male or female regardless, you know? And that's pretty much my whole like that's pretty much my whole non-binary take. You can be what you want. It's just that some people are not going to understand what you're talking about because not everyone thinks of the world that way. And it's much easier to just see people as male and female. And this guy thinks that he's poking holes in that, but I'm not really seeing it, you know?
This very moment. And that shouldn't bother you. It should make you curious. But to go on telling people things like, you're XY and that means you're a boy and boys act like this, is not only preposterously inaccurate, it is...
Yeah, like hiding, like trying to obfuscate what kind of cells you have is complete cope. I agree with that. Like I could go around being like, well, you don't know what cells I have. You don't know what's in my pants. But it's like, I don't know. The thing is, most people would incorrectly guess what I have in my pants, but that's neither here nor there. I want to pretend that they're in some sense biologically trans because the alternative is to accept there's a choice. It means it might have been the wrong choice. Yeah. I mean, people address it in the sense that I've always been a woman and I'm just fixing my body to match that, which there's no evidence that's any kind of mechanism in humans, you know? It's a great metaphor, but that's all it is. Like it's metaphoric things that we used to say like 5-10 years ago that didn't literally mean that, but now people do want to literally mean that kind of thing. And it's like, well, no, just no. You're a male. It's okay. You can be a male that lives as a trans woman. That's fine.
Cruel and dangerous. Which brings me to why I care. As someone who is cisgendered and at least mostly straight.
As someone who is cisgendered, I already feel a sick feeling in my stomach coming here.
You could argue that I don't have a dog in this fight, but the fact of the matter is, I am a scientist and an
anyone can fucking talk about this kind of shit, to be fair. But it's more gross when you're like leading people to think certain things that you don't even think of yourself, you know?
Educator. I care about the truth. I care about human beings, and I especially care about the next generation. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people from the ages of 10 to 24. Lots of young people think about it. I thought about it at that time. But LGBT people...
What do I make of the word cis? I don't really like it, but at the same time... And like, yeah, it's a bit like hypocritical for people to insist on calling people cis when we're so obsessive over people not calling us what we don't want to be called. But at the same time, like when I talk about trans stuff so much, I do need like is it an antonym? Is that the word that means opposite? So I do need something Otherwise, I'm constantly like, I just don't know a better, quicker word for it, you know? So I still use cis for that, but it would depend who I'm around, I guess. If someone was like, oh, don't say cis, I don't like it, I'd probably respect it. Because I do generally respect pronouns and shit, even if I don't agree with them, you know?
People in that age group are almost 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide than their heterosexual peers. And what's worse, LGBT youth who report coming from
Trans women referring to naturally occurring testosterone as a condition they were born. Yeah. They'll refer to their whole male body as a condition. Like, it's my condition that I was born with. Like, you were born male. You're probably completely fine. You really want to change it, then I guess so long as you're sure about it, then sure. But hey.
accepting and non-supportive families are 8 times more likely than the other LGBT youth to have attempted suicide. So we're talking about 8.
Yeah, rejection sucks, and not having supportive people around you is gonna make you more likely to think about doing something terrible. That's true of everyone.
Times more likely than the people who are already 5 times.
And it's more likely, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't remember. It's more proportionately likely to happen to trans people for certain reasons, but I don't know. I've heard this so many times at this point.
More likely than the people who are already stressed the hell out to try to kill themselves. And all of this is
so like trans people are under duress, so let's lie to them and coddle their beliefs, I guess. I don't fucking know.
Is hugely exacerbated by the fact that you have idiots on TV and on the internet saying, aha, this high suicide rate proves that this.
Yeah, that's the thing, actually, what you said. If most people thought about it, they'd be agender or fluid. Like, to what extent are these, like, elaborate gender identities, you know, the really specific, strange ones, you know, that kind of thing? Like, how much of it is just a result of having too much free time and, like, gazing up your navel, you know? I'm actually really confused by my shirt. Oh, I've got it on inside out. Ha, hilarious. I don't care.
This is all a mental disorder. No, it proves that these poor kids are being treated like perverts and freaks for just trying to exist. If the biggest problem that you're having in the 21st century is what people's genitals look like, and
no one has that actual problem. There are people with certain concerns. There are people who just like being dicks, and trans people are easy targets. No one is obsessing over what people have in their genitalia. They have what genitalia they have, whatever the fuck. I don't know.
And what they're doing with their genitals in the company of other consenting adults, if that is the needle on your moral compass.
Like, who are you even talking to? Like, oh, I hate this shit so much.
I strongly encourage you to reevaluate your priorities.
This is just pandering. This is the same shit that everyone fucking says because they want to pander to trans people. Oh, you're just obsessing over people's genitalia because you have a concern about trans women running in sports or whatever the fuck. I don't know.
And maybe you still don't believe me. Maybe you think that I've just gotten something totally wrong or that I misinterpreted the data. That's fine. I'm an evolutionary biologist and I mainly study bioanthropology. I am not.
That's terrifying.
Not a geneticist. I am not a developmental.
This stuff is so scary. I have 2 little boys, 4 and 2. I'm nervous for their futures. Yeah, that's relatable. And I think a lot of trans activists don't really like empathize with parents. I don't have kids myself. I have a nephew who's, I think he's 1.5. And like, I feel the same way. Like, if he starts hearing about like trans stuff, I feel like I'd be like super on it about what these sources are, like where he's getting this information from, because there's just so much shit out there. And it you know, I can understand why parents find it terrifying. And the thing is, like, you're getting these parents who, like, their kids are like coming out as trans and like basically instantly taking on a much higher like suicide attempt percentage, like likelihood, you know? And people will constantly harp on, like, you know, you have to affirm their gender or they're going to kill themselves. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know why more people don't think about like how it must be for the parents in that situation, especially if they don't really understand trans very well and they want to help, but like, fuck, you know, this is a minefield. And almost all the information you find out there is extremely slanted one way or another. It's not helpful.
Biologist. So I would hit the limit of my understanding in this topic well before I hit the limit of what there is to be understood. But I should point out that even considering that, I have not even scratched the surface of what I could have talked about here. But all that being said, as a scientist and an educator, it is my job to cite my sources. So here's a list of some of the books and the studies and the peer-reviewed scientific papers that I use to make this video that support my arguments.
And a community that valorizes and worships suicide as a means of proving the legitimacy of suffering emotions. Yeah, maybe. I mean, suicide is like constantly, when it comes to trans kids especially, I mean, I don't know, I'm a bit kind of wired to see those kind of things more as like manipulation tactics, but I don't know. I'm not skipping because I think he's lying. I'm sure he's read every single one of these, but it's more the way you kind of tilt things to suggest things. Like it's very difficult to critique some of this stuff, especially if you're like me and don't actually have like a biology background or whatever. I mean, I make music, you know. What the fuck do I know? But there's definitely some funny shit in here for sure. Yeah, I mean, if someone's being like, oh, I want this or I'm going to kill myself, like, that's crazy, you know? And I don't know. I don't know. I need to think about that more, but, you know, what are you fixing? You're making sure someone doesn't kill themselves. That's literally it. I'm not sure about that.
So I guess just read through those and get back to me. With that, I'm Forrest Balkai, the Renegade Science Teacher.
There is no point in reading through any like sources if you want to challenge someone like this. It's all in the wording. It's all in the way stuff is presented. And it's all in what he does with that information. Like, someone who's read an awful lot of stuff doesn't necessarily know a huge amount. It depends how they've looked at it. Like, I feel sometimes like I have to sit next to someone and actually see how they read and how they process information in order to determine whether I can trust them or not. And you'll see some of these YouTubers who have these like huge bookshelves full of like mostly philosophy and stuff. And it's like, I don't know if any of this has made you any smarter. I don't know what you've got from any of this kind of stuff, you know?
Thank you so much for watching, for liking, for commenting, for subscribing, and all the other things you do here on YouTube. Have an awesome day. Be yourself and never stop learning. Bye-bye.
Be yourself. Just be yourself, everyone. Just be yourself. Cool. I'm glad that we've been told that yet again. When I was a kid, it used to do my head in, like, be yourself. Like, what does that even mean? And now it's like, I am being myself, but people seem to have a problem with that. So, I don't know.